Hi, my name used to mean something in that house. At my father's funeral, my half-brother stood in the center, wearing my father's watch, accepting his mansion like it was always meant to be his. And me? I was handed a crumpled envelope and called trash in front of the whole family. They laughed, but no one asked what was inside that envelope. No one cared where I'd go, as long as I was gone. What they didn't know is that buried inside that humiliation was a ticket, one that would take me to the truth they'd spent years trying to erase. And when that truth came back, it didn't knock. It didn't shout. It waited until they had everything to lose. Do you want to know what was really in that envelope? I arrived alone. That detail mattered more than I understood at the time. The cemetery sat on a gentle slope, trimmed hedges lining the gravel path like they'd been measured with a ruler. Early fall air, cool, clean, polite. The kind of place families like mine chose to bury their dead because it looked respectable in photographs. I parked at the far end of the lot and walked the rest of the way. Not because I wanted to, but because there was nowhere obvious for me to fit. Groups had already formed near the chapel entrance. My half-brother stood at the center of one cluster, shoulders squared, accepting condolences like he'd rehearsed them. My stepmother hovered nearby, directing people with a hand on their elbow, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Funerals do something strange to families. They strip away pretense faster than any argument ever could. You don't need to read a will to know where you stand. You just need to see where people place their bodies. Inside the chapel, the seating told its own story. The first 2 rows filled quickly. Close family, business associates, old friends who spoke in low voices about legacy and what comes next. I paused at the aisle, scanning for a place that made sense. No one waved. No one shifted to make room. Eventually, I slid into a seat near the end of the 3rd row, slightly off to the side. Not front, not back. Just far enough away to be noticed, but not included. My half-brother took his place up front. My stepmother sat beside him, posture rigid, chin lifted. She adjusted the program stacks herself, as if control over paper and timing might keep the day from slipping through her fingers. I picked up one of the programs. Cream-colored cardstock. Heavy. Expensive. I scanned the names slowly. My father's, my half-brother's, my stepmother's, listed as devoted wife, a few cousins, an aunt I hadn't seen in years. I read it twice before it landed. My name was there, technically. A single line. No designation. No description. Just letters printed smaller than the rest, tucked between extended relatives. It wasn't an accident. No one looked at me. No one asked if there had been a mistake. The omission hung in the air, quiet but intentional. Like furniture rearranged overnight to remind you whose house you're really in. The service began. Music, words about strength, about family values, about continuity. Then my half-brother stood to speak. He had the right voice for it. Confident, warm in a practiced way. He talked about lessons learned, about responsibility, about carrying things forward. He used phrases people nodded along to. What my father built. What will protect? The future. He never said my name. Not once. I watched faces as he spoke. Some attentive, some relieved they weren't the ones standing there. A few glanced toward me, then away, as if proximity alone might make things uncomfortable. When he finished, there was applause. Respectful. Controlled. As people shifted, he stepped closer to where I sat, close enough that I could smell his cologne. He leaned in, voice low, but not careful. You're nothing but trash. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. A couple of people laughed. Short sounds. Nervous, maybe, or amused. It was hard to tell which was worse. I didn't move. I felt my pulse steady, not spike. My hands stayed flat on my knees. I looked at the faces instead. Who smiled, who stared at the floor, who pretended not to hear. That's how you learn who people are. Not when things are calm, but when cruelty is offered without consequence. I stayed silent, not because I didn't have words, but because none of them would have changed what had already been decided. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment my place in this family officially ended. I stood outside the chapel as people filed past me, talking about where to grab lunch, who needed to catch a flight, how elegant the service was. No one looked at me, the same way no one had looked at me inside. The clouds had thickened and the light shifted gray, the kind of light that makes everything feel colder than it really is. I hadn't planned to go back to the estate, but the lawyer said there was a brief moment of final paperwork before things wrapped. That's how he put it. A brief moment, like my entire life could be folded into a few seconds of administrative closure. A line of black cars pulled away one by one. I waited until most had gone before getting into mine. The driver didn't ask where. We both knew the route. Same as it had always been, since I was a kid staring out the back window, thinking that driveway was the longest road in the world. This time, it felt short. Too short. The estate hadn't changed. Tall hedges, perfect lawn, the house standing like it had never aged. But everything felt different. People stood in clusters by the front steps. Some smoked, some whispered. My half-brother leaned against the railing like he already owned the place. Maybe he did. No one greeted me. The lawyer was standing near the entrance, holding something in one hand. It wasn't a folder or a briefcase, just a small, creased envelope, yellowed a little at the edges, looked like it had been in someone's glove box for weeks. He walked toward me, then hesitated. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "I was instructed to give you this," he said, without meeting my eyes. I took the envelope, no name on it, no explanation. Just soft from too many hands and folded at an odd angle. Before I could ask anything, I heard a laugh behind me. "Oh, he got the envelope," my half-brother said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Should have been in a trash bag to match." A couple people chuckled, mostly the ones I didn't recognize, the kind of guests who smile when they smell money. I didn't react. Just stared at him. He smiled wider. "You really thought you were getting the house?" he said. "Dad knew better." That's when she stepped forward. My stepmother. She always had a way of appearing just when things were about to tip over. She didn't yell. She didn't raise a hand. She just delivered blows with calm precision. "This is no longer your home," she said. "The will is clear. Everything here belongs to Daniel now." Daniel, my half-brother. She made it sound like a real estate transaction, not the gutting of a life. "You're welcome to say goodbye to the property from the driveway," she added, "but we'll need you to leave shortly." I opened the envelope. Inside was a single airline ticket. One way. Monaco. No letter. No signature. No date of return. I stood there for a second, holding that ticket like it might explain something. Like it might say, "Here's why this all makes sense." But it didn't. Behind me, someone muttered, "Guess he's got vacation plans." They all laughed. I looked toward the front door. For a second, I considered walking inside. Not to take anything, just to see my father's study one last time. But before I could move, the lawyer shook his head. "You're not on the access list," he said, voice low. "Access list," I repeated. "Your personal belongings will be sorted later." Sorted? Like donations. I turned back toward the driveway. I had walked that path 1,000 times as a kid, sometimes running, sometimes being dragged back inside. Today, it was the slowest walk of my life. I had nothing with me but the clothes I wore and a crumpled envelope with a destination that didn't feel real. No suitcase, no keepsake, no goodbye. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted to erase that I'd ever been there. By the time I reached the end of the driveway, I realized I wasn't just leaving a house, I was being erased. The rain had already started by the time I got back to my car. Not heavy, just steady enough to blur the windshield, like the day was trying to wash itself clean. I sat behind the wheel, engine running, hands resting on my lap. For the first time in a long while, I didn't know where to go. I pulled out of the estate's long driveway slowly, letting the automatic gate swing closed behind me. I didn't look back. Not out of pride, but because I knew if I did, it'd feel too final, like watching a chapter close and knowing the next page was blank. I drove aimlessly for a while, just letting the road stretch out under the tires. I passed the elementary school I went to, the gas station where I used to buy soda after baseball practice, the diner where Dad used to take me Sunday mornings before church. All those places still existed, but none of them felt like mine anymore. The sun was gone now, and the sky was a heavy sheet of charcoal. I turned onto a quieter road near the edge of town. Strip malls, closed storefronts, a few neon signs still flickering. I didn't realize how tired I was until I pulled into a motel parking lot without meaning to. It wasn't the kind of place you'd book in advance. It was the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen. The clerk didn't ask for much, just ID, a credit card, and a signature on a wrinkled form. I handed over my card. She swiped, frowned, swiped again. "It's not going through," she said, not unkindly. "Do you have another?" I gave her a different card. Same result. I didn't panic, but I felt it creep in, like a slow leak in the back of my mind. "Could be your bank's fraud system," she offered. "It happens. They flag weird activity sometimes." I nodded, pretended like that made sense. I opened the banking app on my phone. The signal was weak, the screen slow to load, but the numbers didn't lie. One account was frozen. Another had a pending hold. I knew those alerts. I'd helped Dad set up protections just like that after his first health scare. He'd wanted everything locked up in case someone did something stupid. Guess they thought I was the someone. I thanked the clerk and backed away from the desk. She didn't press, just gave me a look, not pity, but something closer to human decency. The kind of look you give someone who clearly doesn't belong there, but isn't dangerous either. I ended up in my car, again, parked in the far corner of the lot, angled away from the lights. I leaned the seat back, pulled my coat tighter, listened to the rhythm of rain on the roof like it had something to say. Sleep didn't come easily. It wasn't just the cold or the stiff leather seat. It was the silence. No hum of a refrigerator, no creak of old floors, no faint sound of someone walking down a hallway upstairs. Just empty space. I checked my phone again. Battery at 9%. I thought about calling someone, an old friend, a former coworker, even my cousin on my mother's side. But the truth was, I didn't want to explain anything. I didn't want to answer questions or hear the kind of silence that comes when someone doesn't know what to say. At some point, I started laughing, quietly. Not because anything was funny, but because the absurdity had nowhere else to go. Less than 12 hours ago, I was standing in a row of polished pews, watching my brother give a speech about legacy. Now I was trying to get comfortable in the back seat of a car I hadn't paid off yet. I thought about how long I'd kept quiet over the years, how many family dinners I sat through biting my tongue, how many times I told myself, "It's not worth the fight." I wondered if kindness had made me forget how to stand up for myself. The sky grew darker, rain turned to mist. I reached across the passenger seat and picked up the envelope. I didn't open it. Not yet. It felt too small to hold anything meaningful, but somehow too heavy to ignore. I placed it back down. I didn't need answers that night. I just needed to stay. Morning came without ceremony. I woke in the driver's seat to a pale light leaking through the windshield and the ache that comes from sleeping wrong and worrying right. My neck was stiff. My back complained when I shifted, but the panic I expected wasn't there. That surprised me. I sat for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of traffic waking up somewhere beyond the motel lot. A delivery truck downshifting, a door slamming, ordinary sounds. The world hadn't stopped just because my life had. Something had moved inside me overnight. Not hope, not anger, clarity. I stepped out of the car, stretched, and washed my face in the restroom sink. The mirror showed a man who looked tired but intact. No shaking hands, no wild eyes. Just someone who'd reached the bottom and realized it was solid ground. Back in the car, I picked up the envelope. This time, I opened it. I unfolded the ticket slowly, smoothing the creases with my thumb like it might change what was printed there. One way, Monaco. Departure. That afternoon. Not weeks from now. Not symbolic. Immediate. I read it again, then a third time, checking the details. Gate information, airline, seat assignment. It was real, purchased, planned. Monaco wasn't a place you chose at random. It wasn't a joke destination or a punishment. It was precise, deliberate. I thought about old conversations with my father, things he'd mentioned in passing, long trips he never explained, gaps in the family story that never quite lined up. He'd always said, "If I ever send you away, it'll be because you need to see something for yourself." At the time, I thought he meant college. I sat there, engine off, thinking, not spiraling, connecting dots, the timing, the secrecy, the way the envelope had been treated like trash by people who hadn't bothered to look inside. This wasn't exile. It was a door they didn't know existed. I didn't call anyone, not a friend, not a lawyer. Definitely not family. I stopped myself when the urge came, recognizing it for what it was. Old habit, seeking permission, asking for validation from people who had already decided my value. Instead, I drove, first to a pharmacy for travel-sized basics, then to a discount store for a small carry-on and a change of clothes. Nothing dramatic, just enough to move forward without drawing attention. At the airport parking garage, I took a breath before stepping out, the echo of my footsteps steadying me. My phone buzzed as I stood in the security line. A message from an unknown number, legal language, polite but firm. A reminder about ongoing matters and expected discretion. Another notification followed, this one from a distant relative. Vague concern, too much interest, not enough warmth. They were already shaping the story. I imagined the version they'd tell, how I'd be framed as unstable, ungrateful, difficult, the kind of person who leaves and proves everyone right. I didn't respond. At the gate, I sat with my bag at my feet and watched travelers pass, families arguing about seats, Couples negotiating coffee runs. Businessmen tapping impatiently at their watches. Nobody knew me. Nobody needed to. Silence settled in, not heavy, but useful. I understood then that silence could be leverage, that withholding a reaction was sometimes the strongest move on the board. They expected noise. They expected a scene. They expected me to beg or lash out. Instead, I boarded when my group was called. As the plane taxied and the city shrank beneath us, I felt the shift lock into place. This wasn't running. This wasn't hiding. As the plane lifted off, I realized this wasn't an escape. It was a repositioning. The descent into Monaco was smooth, almost suspiciously so. I stepped off the plane into air that smelled nothing like home. Salt, stone, quiet wealth that didn't announce itself. The airport wasn't loud. No chaotic crowds, just order and waiting. A driver met me at the curb with a sign that read my full name, spelled correctly, which I hadn't seen in a while. He didn't talk much. I didn't either. We rode in silence along winding roads, past cliffs that dropped into glittering water, past terraces where people sipped coffee without looking at their phones. I'd expected something grand. Maybe cold stone gates or a steel facade meant to impress. But the car stopped at a modest driveway, tucked into a shaded turn above the harbor. The house was simple, low-built, nearly hidden behind green hedges and flowering vines. Not showy, intentional. I stepped out with my carry-on in hand. My chest was calm, not hopeful, not afraid. Just still. She opened the door before I knocked. Her hair had gone silver, shorter than I remembered from the photos in the one album my father had quietly kept. She didn't smile. Neither did I. But we didn't need to. "Come in," she said, and turned before I could answer. That was enough. The house smelled like lemon oil and something faintly floral. Lived in, but not cluttered. Her study faced the water. We sat across from each other with a low table between us and nothing else to buffer the space. She placed a leather folder on the table and slid it toward me. "I told him to wait until you were ready," she said. "He didn't." I opened it. Inside, notarized documents, property trusts, investment accounts across multiple countries, letters written in my father's hand. The number, 102 million. Spread across places with names I'd only seen in movies or in the fine print of financial thrillers. I looked at her. "This doesn't feel real," I said. "It isn't for them," she replied. No smugness in her voice. Just a statement of fact. She explained that my father had planned everything quietly, that he'd seen the rot growing in the house back home, but hadn't known how to stop it without destroying me along with it. That this distance, was his way of cutting me loose from the weight before it crushed me completely. It wasn't punishment, she said. It was insurance. Later, alone on the terrace, I watched the lights on the water flicker. Boats moved soundlessly across the bay. Somewhere back home, they were probably toasting to their victory. Sitting in leather chairs I used to dust as a boy, convinced they had won. And maybe, for a moment, they had. But the mansion wasn't the inheritance. That house had always been about noise, appearances, control. This, what I had now, was quiet, untouched, free of the power games and whispered insults. I reached into my bag and pulled out the crumpled envelope again. I hadn't meant to keep it, but there it was, creased, small, unimportant in their eyes. I smoothed it on my knee and left it there. Trash, he'd called me. But trash doesn't fly first class into Monaco with the deed to everything nobody else even knew existed. The house, the titles, The smug words, those had been distractions, and they took the bait like children grabbing the shiny toy. I got the real thing. Before bed, I read one of my father's letters. It wasn't sentimental, just one line stood out. Son, sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. I turned out the light. The next morning, a short message came in from an old contact. Apparently, my half-brother had been named in an estate dispute, publicly. The details weren't clear yet, but the storm had started. Lawyers had begun circling. My name wasn't even involved, because legally, I was never part of their story. They didn't even know what to ask for. And I didn't need to tell them. They thought they had taken everything from me. In reality, they handed me the only thing that ever mattered.